I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on GBM, we're talking about a powerful book. It is called See Me Now. It is an unflinching story of survival, trauma, and ultimately redemption, drawn from the real-life experiences of Rafiq Williams, who grew up navigating violence, homelessness, and impossible choices on the streets of inner Philadelphia. Co-written with journalist AnneFMorris and veteran educator Dr. Joyce Jeuell, this book blends lived experience, investigative storytelling, and educational insight into a deeply human account of what it means to be unseen and what it takes to reclaim your life. This is not just a memoir, it's a reckoning, a warning, and ultimately a story of resilience. We're delighted to have these very talented creators join us here today. We thank the team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put them on TV today, and we ask viewers like you to support authors like them by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing their amazing book. The links are below this interview. Rafiq and Joyce, thank you all so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us, Logan.
Great to have you on the show. Rafiq, let me begin with you. When you think back to yourself at age 12, what was the very first survival rule that you learned that started for you during those years?
At age 12, the thing that stuck out the most was be aware of my surroundings, always be able to spot danger before it's in my immediate vicinity, because it was a matter of life and death if I didn't spot it right away.
Yeah, this is a tale of survival in many, many ways. Tell us a little bit about your life, what it was like growing up, in a dangerous situation is maybe one way to put it.
Without giving away too much of the book for those who haven't read it, Logan, the earliest parts of my childhood started off good up until the time when something really catastrophic happened, and that was the sexual abuse by a cousin of mine when I was around 7 years old. From there, things began to spiral out of control because I had a mother who was addicted to drugs, who at one point tried to commit suicide. I had a father who was tied to a mafia syndicate in Philadelphia called the Junior Black Mafia. And from that point, I had to navigate a life of loneliness. My brother and I at times, because our mother would leave us home while she's out doing on binges of drug using, my father running the street. So from time to time, my brother and I would find ourselves alone, trying to fend for ourselves with the bare essentials, of course, in the house of bread, milk, and butter, things like that. And we would try to put things together to make sure that we would eat. And then when she did return home, she would make sure that our clothes were washed. But the environment that we grew up in was just so volatile that you just never know what to expect from day to day. And that taught me how to just navigate life in and of itself the way I saw it. And from there, things continued to progress to the point where, like I said, my mother tried to commit suicide. My father was ultimately indicted by the federal government. And then for me, it wound up with a life of homelessness when my mother tried to stab me at the age of 13, 12 or 13, I believe it was. And from there, it was just about, how do I survive the mean streets of Philadelphia as a child in an adult's world? And needless to say, many of the adults that I encountered along those ways, they had their own fierce way of living that a child like me, quite frankly, shouldn't have been able to navigate, but I was thankfully able to navigate. And that brings me to the point where I was able to find a path that ultimately led me to a life of education, turning what started off as a real glim perspective on life to a definite awakening of life that presented me with much better opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And hence, at the end, this is really and ultimately a redemption story. And talk to me a little bit about your involvement, your collaboration, and what you brought to the book as a journalist.
Is that for me, Logan, or is that for
Anne.
Joyce? Anne, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Though the Rafiq's life was filled with violence, chaos, trauma, all of those things, the most compelling part of the story is what he did despite that. So that is really the bigger scope of the book, we sort of had to tell that first part to show the second part, which is that far too many kids are still living like he grew up today, and they don't have anyone to see. Like when we were interviewing him, he would say, like, I didn't know how to become a doctor. I didn't know how to become a lawyer.
Mm.
He didn't know the way. So that's sort of how we also landed on the title, is that he can legitimately talk to kids about first of all, being seen. That's how we landed on the title of See Me Now.
Mm.
Because though he had no one to see, he did make it from a very unlikely place. And he would like to be that person that kids who don't have anybody to put their eyes on. Also, expanding beyond that, he was not helped in any way, not by schools. I mean, this man, is the dean of one of the largest or the largest public high school in Delaware, and the last grade he completed was eighth.
Mm.
Nobody came for him. The schools did not come for him. Nobody came for him, and so he decided to just make money on the corner. Like, what is education going to do for him? So beyond the kids, we want to reach people who deal with kids um, and people who are quite aware of how many kids are growing up this way.
Yeah. And children and young adults often don't see the value in an education, but they have a parent or a role model there, or a parent figure to say, you're going to school, this is why, and if you don't like it, there are consequences. But obviously that type of discipline was missing. Um, Joyce, let's talk to you a little bit about an educator's standpoint. What warning signs do you see in Rafiq's childhood that are often or too often missed or overlooked by schools?
That's an excellent question. For Rafiq, there wasn't a lot missed because they went to school every day. They had clean clothes. They had something to take to school to eat. So, and those are some of those signs that you look for, how a child dresses, if they're wearing the same clothing every day, if they're wearing inappropriate clothing we're experiencing this horribly cold weather, and the kids are wearing short sleeves or no sleeves to school and don't have a jacket, that type of thing. Also, if they're not as clean, some youngsters do come to school and teenagers as well that don't have an opportunity to be clean. And even while homeless, Rafiq made sure he took care of that. Those were the things he did learn early on in his life, and he did take care of that. So sadly, he did fall through those cracks. Um, he was a little mouthy when he was in later elementary school and middle school.
Did you say he was?
Well, he and so as a result, some staff members were fearful of him
Mm.
rather than looking to see what might be behind that aggressive type
Mhm.
behavior. And that's something else that kids can exhibit. They may become bully type individuals because of the environment that they're coming from. And it gives them an opportunity to feel stronger or to feel better than, but most importantly, to be seen.
Mm.
And unfortunately, they're seen for all the wrong reasons. And those are the things that we need to be looking at to worry about for these youngsters. And there are more resources in our schools today. Certainly, ever since COVID, we have much more of a focus on the mental health aspect.
Mm.
So hopefully, people are looking for some of these signs.
Yeah, and looking for the answer to why. Why is a child misbehaving? Why is a child lashing out? What's the underlying cause? Rafiq, your book talks about secrets you buried just to keep going. Talk to us about the emotional weight that carried even when no one else could see it.
So I'm going to always refer back to the incident that I just referenced, the sexual abuse that I encountered at the age of 7. Because what happened, I'm going to use the term, Logan, that's really not common to today's society, but it's not me saying it. This is what my dad would say to me,
Right.
and I had to make the correlation, right? So I was really close to my mom, and at times when my mom was absent, I would cry a lot. So my dad would say something like, "Oh, you're a faggot," right? So for me, the person who was sexually abusing my brother and I, he troubled with his masculinity, and he experimented with certain things in the homosexual realm. So for me, I made the correlation. Okay, you're saying if I cry, then you're going to reference me as dad. I don't
Right.
want to be referenced as that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to shut off every sense of emotion known to man, so you would never even think or categorize me with my cousin who just sexually abused us, even though I didn't tell my dad that it happened. So that's the main secret that I buried, and that secret came to haunt me into my 40s
Mm.
because I was unable to really be affectionate with my children when I became a single father. I was unable to be affectionate with romantic interest that I had over the years. Ultimately, I was unable to be affectionate and show any sights of empathy or emotion with who's the woman who's currently my wife. So
Mm.
that secret in and of itself, the one that I buried the longest, was troubling, and it hindered me from having so many successful, probably, and meaningful relationships. And it wasn't until I went to therapy and found a renewed faith in God that I was able to be delivered and healed from that trauma and
Yeah.
that secret that I buried for many, many years.
Yeah, it's terrible. You're carrying around a burden of shame. Obviously, you had no role or responsibility in the attacks that were perpetrated on you, but a child doesn't know that. A child is scared, and like you said, generationally, that's just how dads talked in that era. And you didn't
Correct.
want to be labeled that word, and you'd be afraid to speak out. And I think most people can see themselves doing the same thing, unfortunately, in the same situation. And talk to us about navigating writing about violence and trauma in a way that preserved honesty while respecting the people involved.
We three collaborated on that. We worked very well together. So um, I have years of experience as a writer, and a lot of it was in big urban settings.
Mhm.
But Joyce found Rafiq one of the most fascinating students. You can clarify that, Joyce, but as a teacher, Rafiq lived it. So we really did collaborate on it together.
Yeah, wonderful. And Joyce, what does Rafiq's story reveal about the long-term impact of childhood trauma on learning and behavior?
His trauma, his adverse childhood experiences, they're off the charts for what he suffered through. That he could come out on the other end with hope and be such not only a survivor, but a thriver and a
Mhm.
role model is beyond amazing. And when I heard small bits of his story when he was first in one of my graduate classes, which is how we first met several years ago, I thought, how can this be? How can this individual be an educator after all he's been through? And
Mm.
it only made him, and he is to this day, probably one of the best educators because of his listening skills, his ability to communicate. For anyone else having these issues, yes, therapy of whether it's a guidance counselor at school, if there's a way to get therapy on the outside with a private professional, that would be extremely helpful. Sometimes just having a teacher as a mentor or a coach or a favorite teacher, like if you're in music or interested in music or something of that nature, but trying to find that person who will see you and make sure that your visibility is something that can be translated for you and for others so that you feel that you're worthy and you have something to contribute and you believe in yourself. And it is really about developing that hope. It takes a lot of time. Um, and even if you don't have those individual opportunities for guidance counselors, not all schools can have them, and certainly not in the numbers that they're really needed, or therapy on the outside. It's having that teacher who will be patient,
Mm.
cautious, careful, and listening, that has some cultural proficiency that he or she will be able to help draw that child out in some way and acknowledge them positively in some way, which will start to build the hope and the realization in that child, I could be, I can.
Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful. And children are blessed when they find that teacher, that coach, that special person to be a mentor, to be a trustworthy adult, to show them compassion, to show them heart, and to see them, as
Mhm.
you mentioned. Rafiq, being accused of murder is a turning point. Talk to us about how that moment forced you to confront the person you had become.
Oh, it's a great question, Logan. So for me,
Please.
when I looked up and I found myself inside of a jail at that time, 21 years old, accused with murder and attempted murder, and I denied bail, which means I'm going to be housed there.
Yeah.
And at this point, I don't know for how long. Again, I went in, I still had anger. I still had some things that were still fired and burning inside of me. So I found myself in a situation where ultimately I stabbed another inmate and I was sent to the hole. And in the hole is where I began to confront some things. A friend of mine, he was an older gentleman, he had given me a Bible. And I said to him, I'm like, man, you can't give me that. I'm Muslim. And he's like, look, have you ever been in a hole before? And I'm like, no, this is my first time in jail. He's like, well, you're going to need this.
Hmm.
And he's like, you're going to need something to read. So I took the Bible. I'm in the hole. I'm in the hole for about 6 months. I began reading and I began confronting whether God was real.
Hmm.
And in that time alone, 23 hours by yourself in a cell with only 1 hour of rec time out a day, you get a lot of time to think, you get a lot of time to process, and you get a lot of time to read.
Hmm.
So that's what I did. And then during that period of time, I began to try something that, quite frankly, I didn't do before. Because as a former Muslim, there's a certain way you pray, right? But
Hmm.
in the Christian faith, there's a different way you pray, right? It's more open. It's free to say whatever. So I tried it. I said, God, if you're real, not the God that I've been serving, but the God, if you're real, according to this Bible, then I need you to show me. And Logan, I can't make up the next event that happened. I'm not smart enough to make this up.
Yeah.
So I came out of the cell the next day for my hour of rec time. I saw some guys that I knew. And normally in my general conversations, a curse word was probably every other word. The moment I went to go say one is
Hmm.
as if somebody stuck their hand in my mouth and it wouldn't come out.
Hmm.
I was like shocked. I didn't know what was going on. I thought I was probably having a stroke or something. I
Yeah.
ran back to my cell and I immediately fell to my knees and I'm like, oh my God, God, you're real.
Yeah.
And from there, I began the process of unraveling, dealing with, and confronting a lot of the things that I buried that kept me trapped for so many years.
So, in many ways, that was the turning point in your life, being in the hole, reading the Bible, finding out about God, finding your faith that became became the building blocks on which you could become the man you are today.
100%. One would have thought it was just being accused with murder, but that wasn't it.
Yeah.
It was that experience in the whole. I mean, murder was the thing that sent me there,
Yeah.
but it was that experience in the whole. And from that moment, I knew that it's time for Rafiq to start living something different, doing something different.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. This is truly an amazing book. I think it's a game changer of a book. I think it helps people understand inner city children, suburban children, children who are troubled, because it's not just an inner city problem. Obviously, it's perhaps more challenging when you're living on the mean streets of Philadelphia, but there are problems in children living in Larchmont and Scarsdale and Long Beach and wherever it might be as well, that keep the secrets hidden, that keep the secrets buried, and are in a lot of pain right now and are going unseen. The name of the book is See Me Now. It is a powerful, unflinching story of survival, trauma, and redemption drawn from the real life experiences of Rafiq Williams, who grew up navigating violence, homelessness, and impossible choices on the streets of inner city Philadelphia. We're delighted to have these wonderful authors join us here today. Rafiq and Joyce, thank you all so much for joining me.
Logan, if I could just have one last word for the listeners and the viewers.
Absolutely.
Can I leave them with this excerpt that I was
Sure.
prepared to read? And this,
Absolutely.
again, is from the book of See Me Now. This is in chapter 1. And it reads, "She was angry, very angry with me. It wasn't just the rage flashing in her eyes, but the butcher knife she was wielding in her hand. Even as a 13-year-old, seeing my mom like that, I knew my options were limited. Run or die. As she brought the knife forward, I pushed her to avoid being stabbed and started running for my life. I could hear my mom screaming, 'You better not come back. You gonna put your hands on me? I brought you into this world, and now I will take you out of it.' I just kept running."
Wow. That's very, very powerful prose. I think you have a great collaboration here, of course, between a person who lived it, a person who's a journalist, and a person who's an educator. And I think those three voices really inform this story very, very well, that it's much, much more than just a memoir, but it's a truly insightful piece of literary work. Rafiq and Joyce, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Logan, for having us.
Yeah.
I appreciate your time, your insight, and the wonderful work on this book, and of course, your candor and your talent as well. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford for the Global Book Network. So long for now.